All right, got an awesome episode teed up this week. I've got Stuart Barefoot dropping in on the Path to Freedom podcast with us. And no, the last name's not a coincidence. Stuart is my brother, younger brother by 3 years. And so, amongst many of the other accomplishments, you'll hear Stuart talk a little bit about today. One of his biggest accomplishments is surviving childhood with me as his older brother. So, uh, glad you're still here with us, Stuart, and thanks for taking some time to join us on the podcast today.
Yeah, man, this is cool.
Yeah, and so one of Stuart's businesses that we'll talk a little bit more about today is actually producing and editing podcasts. So Stuart's actually really kind of the brains behind the Path to Freedom podcast. He was very helpful in helping me get the podcast started in the first place. And Stuart handles all of the editing and production for the podcast going forward. So he's been a huge help in making this podcast become a reality, and very cool to have him joining me as a guest today as well.
Yeah, get to see the other side of it, I guess. I usually just hear the final recording. So this is a little bit behind the scenes, I guess, or even further behind the scenes than I usually am.
Yeah, that's right. Pretty interesting. So, look, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your story? You've really kind of been an entrepreneur ever since getting out of college. I mean, one of my I guess proudest accomplishments of yours is that you've really never had a job. You've never really worked for anyone other than part-time jobs in high school and college. So why don't you share with us a little bit about your business, what you do, and kind of how you've gotten to where you are today?
All right, yeah. So in a nutshell, what I do is I run a small digital production service called Small League Productions. And what we really do is we work with creators of all stripes to help make what I call a handcrafted podcast just for them. So a lot of businesses or a lot of podcast production services offer a lot of like subscription packages, or I don't say generic necessarily and to be insulting or anything, but it's their way of streamlining their services, and that works for them. What I do and what we do with Small League Productions is we craft a service specifically for each different podcaster, because everyone's going to have different needs. I've worked on true crime podcasts. I've done more narrative style podcasts. And then I do stuff like yours, which I would classify more as like B2B type stuff. You're connecting with other businesses or business owners essentially.
Yeah.
So everyone's a little bit different, and there's no one size fits all. So I really try to tee the services to what they need and where they are on their podcasting journey. Sometimes they've already got a lot of stuff done, but so yeah, for broad strokes purposes, that can include a lot of editing, a lot of production, some creative consultations. Sometimes it's just as simple as helping them actually just get it published, and then they can take it from there. So I do that and a little bit of voice work on the side to supplement that. So explainer videos, working with a lot of different startups on Kickstarter campaigns and that kind of thing.
So basically doing the professional voiceover work for like training videos, anything where a company or an individual would need someone that knows what they're doing when it comes to recording audio to go in and read a script or something of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. Not so much training videos necessarily, but to your point, yeah, a lot of times just if a trained voice artist, and I am trained, I work with Glenn Holzer, a very highly respected voice coach out of Brooklyn. I've worked with, you can look him up sometime. He's great. So yeah, but to your point, yeah, anytime they need a trained professional voice for something that requires it, I'm one of the guys they hire.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember when you first started getting into this, I'd never even really thought about it. Like that was a service that, people would be looking for and that you could actually earn money doing. And so you've kind of found a nice little niche for yourself, and then got into the podcasting kind of after you got into the voice work, right?
Yeah, in a roundabout way. For me, I guess it really started back in college when I was doing college radio.
Mm-hmm.
I did that all 4 years I was there. And then the last two, I was actually hired as the station sports director, which was a paid position. And so at that time I was hosting a sports radio show with my friends, and that was a lot of fun. And then I was also in charge of every single day writing and producing a sports brief or making sure it got done. Sometimes, there was other students who would help me out, but making sure it got done. So I had a bit of a background in kind of like writing and producing and recording audio, and really, really enjoyed the technical aspect of that. It was a lot of fun for me just to start kind of with an idea or a little blurb and turn that into something that sounded pretty cool with background music and could get played on the radio. So I kind of actually had a lot of the more technical skills needed for podcasting. I probably developed those before I did really the voiceover type thing. So college was pretty formative in that sense, and that I got to learn both aspects of that.
Yeah, no, it's cool how it has kind of come full circle for you, because, back when you were in college, podcasting was not nearly as prominent as it is now. So interesting that you were able to learn a lot of the skills that you now use producing and editing podcasts at a time when, podcasting really wasn't a thing, or it certainly wasn't mainstream at that point in time. And one of the other things that is probably worth talking a little bit about is some of the PA announcing work that that you do for, various live sporting events. So tell the audience a little bit more about that, because I would say that's definitely a revenue stream for your business as well. And how'd you get into it?
Yeah. So public address announcer. So when you go to a sporting event, whenever we get back to having live sports everywhere, whenever that might be,
Hopefully soon.
Yeah, hopefully soon. So yeah, I'm the guy introducing the starting lineups, and making sponsored reads and that kind of thing. I got into that. That's actually a pretty funny story too. The first job I had after college, actually, I got an internship with the Winston-Salem Open. That's a professional tennis tournament on the U.S. Open circuit. It's the one, if you follow tennis, it's the tournament they have literally the week before the U.S. Open.
Yep.
It can be, so we draw some pretty big names. So anyway, I got a job there as, I don't even remember what they called it. It was like the PA and media assistant. Just, yeah. So not to go into too much detail, but essentially I was like a game day producer almost. I was making sure audio was hooked up. I was making sure that the PA announcer at the time had his script and was coordinating graphics with other people and everything, and just doing a lot of behind the scenes type of work. So it was that was really good experience. But the first day ever, not the first day ever of working there, but the first day of the tournament that I ever worked there is what they call the qualifying round. So that's where you get a bunch of people who weren't ranked high enough to make the cut to be invited in, or you get, a lot of college kids looking for their first chance at being in a pro tournament.
Yeah.
So really, really not a thing that draws a lot of people. And I was already really nervous because it was like, my first day, producing the show and everything. And I kind of had it in my head that everything was going to go like really wrong. And then the PA announcer just doesn't show up. He got, I don't know what the story was. I still know him. And to this day, I've never really asked him why he didn't come to work that day, but he didn't. And when I called him, he was like, well, I'm in Charlotte. This was in Winston-Salem. So I'm about to have an aneurysm at this point.
Right.
And so I actually, I call our tournament director to tell him what happened. And he actually says, well, come down and talk to me. And I'm thinking like, this is bad. This is really going sideways. And we're kind of walking this little sidewalk. I'm walking towards him. He's walking towards me. And I kind of told him what happened, and he didn't even stop. He just passed me. He's like, I don't care. You do it. just kept walking. He literally, it was such a afterthought to him. And that actually, in a weird way, kind of calmed my nerves. I was like, well, he's the guy.
If he's not freaking out about it, then why should I freak out about it?
Yeah. So that was my first time ever doing public address announcing. And I mean, I probably didn't really hit it out of the park or anything, but no one really yelled at me or anything like that. So
right. The tournament still went on. Yeah.
And then the other guy showed up for the rest of the week, and I could actually do the job I was hired to do. But yeah, so that turned into, I guess I didn't screw it up too bad, because it was at Wake Forest University. They host the tournament on their campus. And so that turned in, they're like, well, why don't you, do a few of our events this fall. And at the same time, UNCG, where I graduated, had asked me to do the same thing. And from there, it just kind of got bigger and bigger. Ended up doing the Greensboro Grasshoppers. They're the single A affiliate of the Pittsburgh Pirates. I also do now I do the PA announcing for the tennis tournament. And I also, at Elon University, I do their men's and women's basketball and their football. So it's a pretty nice side gig, for sure.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting. I don't think I had even heard the story about you kind of falling backwards into that very first PA announcing gig where the other guy just didn't show up. But it's interesting how years later that's turned into a revenue stream for you. You know, you've got several universities, a professional tennis tournament, and a minor league baseball team that you do PA announcing for. And
there's one other funny story if we've got the time to do it about that. Another event I kind of fell backwards into early on. This is probably 6 or 7 years ago when I was first really starting to get gigs regularly. I had gotten hired to do the Intercontinental Futsal Cup, which is indoor arena soccer. It's a really cool sport if you've never seen it. And there's parts of the world, as you can imagine, where that's really big. South America and parts of Europe, they really go crazy for it. Not so much here in America. And somehow or another, Greensboro, North Carolina was the host site of the Intercontinental Futsal Cup at our Greensboro Coliseum. Again, don't know who made that decision.
Right.
This was a very poorly managed event, as evidenced by the fact that they hired me to do the PA announcing for it with the thought that I was a fluent Spanish speaker, which, and I wish I
know. I've never heard you speak a lick of Spanish.
I wish I could, and I've never intentionally given anyone like the impression that I could. I don't know. The guy who hired, and literally, so I get there, I get set up at the media table where they have the PA mic and everything, and was talking to the producer for a bit, and he's like, we've got a lot of Latino players from South America on a lot of these rosters. He's like, but the good thing is that you speak Spanish, so you can say those names pretty easily. And I was like, I don't speak Spanish. Like, I should be honest about this. And again, it was a situation where it could have gone poorly, but the guy's just like, oh, whatever.
All right. Do your best pronouncing the names in the lineup, and anyone that doesn't speak English, I guess, is going to have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it worked out. It worked out pretty well anyway. But again, so that's kind of one theme I think we'll probably hit on here with freelancing is sometimes you do kind of fall backwards into opportunities, and a lot of times it's just kind of making the most of them and kind of just going with the flow a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I think so that's a really good point, and I think it's not even just true with freelancing. I think it's true with entrepreneurship in general and really life, right? I mean, is you got to be willing and able to jump on an opportunity when it presents itself. You know, you could have very easily at that first tennis tournament just been too scared to do the PA announcing, right? And you could have gone back to the tournament director and said, hey man, I don't feel comfortable doing this. I've never done anything like this before. And he would have probably found someone else to do it, right? But you were willing to try something you'd never done before and try it in front of a stadium full of people, right? So it's not even like you're learning kind of behind closed doors. You're out there talking in front of a pretty large number of people. So I think that's a very valid point, which is, you can't be so worried about whether or not you've done something before if you have, what you would think to be the relevant experience to try something new. And if you are willing to do that, maybe you don't knock it out of the park the very first time, but you learn from it, and who knows what other doors you'll be able to open, by being willing to try something like that.
And I think and you're correct. And I also think it speaks a lot to good leadership. I thought that was a good example of leadership where, I guess he knew me well enough to know that he thought I could handle it.
Right.
And kind of gave me that opportunity. I was 22 years old at the time. I mean, not very old, had no real experience. And that was, a good example of a tournament director just kind of giving one of his employees a chance to try something different. I mean, if he hadn't, if he hadn't just and callously said, I don't care, you do it, who knows, I might never have ever tried to get behind the mic. So I think that's a good example of, how leaders can just kind of give their employees some responsibility and give them the chance to try something.
Yeah, no doubt. And also, he made a quick decision, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
something that he took too long to decide on. He was in a tough spot. He kind of had a curveball thrown at him. He had to make a split second decision. Very common, situation for leaders to find themselves in. And I also think the fact that he didn't panic, right? Because you mentioned earlier, like him being kind of so nonchalant, like, okay, that's fine, you do it. That calmed your nerves, right? If he would have
Mm-hmm.
like freaked out and panicked and then still asked you to do it, you were already nervous. If you saw him freaking out, your nerves would have shot through the roof, most likely.
Yeah.
So that's a good point too, is,
Mm-hmm.
how he kind of handled that as a leader. But, to me, again, it's interesting. And, we've talked for a while about having you on the podcast to kind of share your story. And really, I guess at the end of the day, what you do is freelancing, but I mean, you've been able to turn it into a business, right? Small League Productions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'm kind of curious, because I would imagine a lot of people listening to this are thinking the same question. Did you kind of envision, when you started getting into some of this, did you envision turning this into a business for yourself and kind of, making this your livelihood? Or was it more something that just kind of happened and you were like, oh yeah, I'm interested in this. I'll try this. I'll do this. And now, here we are 6-7 years later and you've got this business. How did it all kind of, happen to get you to this point?
It probably wasn't a vision, and that might be where I'm a little bit different than some of your other guests who kind of had a lifelong interest in entrepreneurship. For me, it was actually just kind of a natural progression of trying to make a living doing the things I like doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of times it kind of, after college, it kind of started with the PA announcing, and it was kind of like, all right, well, this is cool, but you only get paid for the events you do. It's not like you're getting commissions or royalties or anything like that. So, they don't, PA announcing it pays okay for like, the amount of time you spend on it, but it's not like it's something you do every day. So, and I wanted to keep doing it. So I wanted to find a way. I was like, all right, well, I've got to find something I can do to supplement that. And I figured, well, a lot of times that means, because sometimes you have sporting events that happen on like a Tuesday afternoon. I was like,
Right.
well, a 9 to 5 won't work. And with what I wanted to do, I kind of envisioned myself going into radio and doing something kind of like Dan Patrick. And you learn really quickly that those kind of jobs really don't exist for the most part. I mean,
Yeah. Hard to come by.
Yeah. He had to spend 25, 30 years working in the industry to do what he does. So I couldn't really find any kind of job in radio. So I started seeking out freelancing opportunities, because I figured, oh, that's cool. I can do them on my time and still be available to work at events as needed. And so it started more with voice work, I guess, initially. So that just kind of, it was a pretty slow progression. You have to have, if you do voice work, you need to have a demo reel and have that really well produced. So it actually, what I did was, I went back to my old college radio station, because I've never left Greensboro, and I did a little bit of work for them for free if they would let me use their studio to record voiceover demos. So I would find these scripts of these old like PSAs and stuff and just read them, record them, and make my own demo reels. And that sounds sketchy, but it's actually, it's really not when you think about it, because all it is showing potential clients like, look, I can do voice work. This is what it sounds like.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter what you're reading. It's more you demonstrating your ability to read whatever you have in front of you and do it in a professional manner that's going to sound good. When I love the part about, you went back to the radio station you worked at in college and kind of bartered with them a little bit. Like, hey, I'll do some work for you for free. And in exchange, you got to use the professional recording equipment, right? Which you probably couldn't have afforded to go out on your own and buy all the equipment that you needed to, set up these demo reels and stuff like that to get your voiceover business going. So that's cool. And that right there is so common. You'll hear examples like that with other entrepreneurs where to get started, they were willing to, go out and work for free or intern or whatever they could do to learn or get access to what they needed to accomplish what they were trying to accomplish. So that's an interesting point that you bring up. So it wasn't necessarily like you're, finishing up college and you're like, hey, I don't really want to go work for someone else. I want to start my own business. It was more, kind of one thing happened and then it all just kind of over time led to this, but you really enjoyed doing the PA work and kind of recognized that a typical 9-to-5 job wasn't going to allow you to keep doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, that realization. And again, just also kind of learning pretty quickly that the opportunities I envisioned working in radio really didn't exist. And I think a lot of it was, I really liked doing college radio. I really liked the culture. I liked the environment. I liked that in our case, we were actually allotted a budget by the university and could spend it essentially however we wanted to, as long as we didn't go over it. So it wasn't really a business model, and it wasn't really, as it turns out, it wasn't really experience that would have lent itself well to working in commercial radio. And I found pretty quickly after applying for and interviewing for commercial radio jobs, I learned two things. One, I didn't really want to do that. And two, they didn't want me. And what I mean by that is college radio apparently in the commercial and has a bad reputation in the radio industry. They don't, they looked at us as kind of like a bunch of stoner slackers and people who didn't really take the industry very seriously. I looked at it a little bit differently. I looked at it as it was an opportunity to work with a bunch of different people towards, a common creative goal of some sort. So I kind of figured, all right, well, a career in radio is probably out. And anyway, the industry's moved more towards podcasting anyway.
Yeah.
In some ways. But so yeah, it was more, it wasn't necessarily a grand vision. It was just more a natural progression of events and where one thing led to another. So that said, I like the entrepreneurial aspect of it. I never thought I would, but I do enjoy being my own boss, getting to pick the kind of clients I work with. And we'll probably say more on that as this goes on, but
yeah, but I think it's a great topic for this podcast, right? I mean, this is kind of your path to freedom that you're charting and how you've done it. And it's a point I try to, get across as often as I can on the podcast is, there's not one way to accomplish this type of freedom in your life. I mean, it's different for everyone. The businesses that I'm involved in, very different from your business. It's not so much about what the business is. It's what does it allow you to do that you wouldn't be able to do if you were working for someone else.
Exactly.
That's really to me what, this type of freedom that we talk about on the podcast is all about. At what point did you kind of recognize though that, hey, I think I can combine these different things that I'm doing and that I really enjoy doing into enough income that I don't have to worry about going out and getting a job working for someone else?
I would say I probably started to turn a corner around 2016 ish. If I had to pinpoint it.
Yeah.
And even since then, there's been a lot of ebbs and flows. I mean, I would say even in like the last year, I'm probably just in a much different position than I was a year ago, certainly 2 years ago. So I don't know if there was just one moment, but there one point there was, I kind of had this thought. I was like, yeah, I don't necessarily need to go find a job and have a career in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
I've, and a lot of it's just been through building a network of people, working at different events and meeting different people. I've gotten to try a lot of different things too. So it's kind of it's a good question, but it's tough to answer because I don't think there was just one moment. I think it's just kind of, I feel like I realize that and feel it more as time goes on.
Well, sure. I mean, and that makes sense, right? Because to your point, you build a network. The more work you do, the more examples you have to show people, right? The more credibility you have, the more that you do. And you build confidence in yourself all along the way too, right? With every with every new gig that you get, whether it's a new podcast you're producing or another voiceover client or a new sporting event that you're the PA announcer for, it adds to your resume. It gives you more credibility, but you also continue to build confidence in yourself. So that makes sense that there wouldn't be like, one specific day that you could kind of pinpoint.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And kind of to build off just real quickly, that point you made it. Yeah, it used to always be, I think, like, I remember actually thinking when I first started working in minor league baseball, I actually wasn't a PA announcer. I started out as a camera operator.
Yeah.
And then kind of got promoted as time went on. I was the technical director for a while and then did some sound design. But the thought in my head was always like, well, I could never be the PA announcer here. It's too big of a stadium. It's too much. And then I got the chance to do it and I could. And so it's always been kind of like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just say, wasn't the guy that was doing it before you, like, hadn't he been doing it forever?
Yeah, about 20 years or so.
Yeah. So you kind of had in your mind, I could never replace him, right? Because he's got all this experience. It's way bigger than me. And now here you are. You've been doing it for what, 3 or 4 years now?
This would have been my 6th season doing it if the pandemic hadn't come.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, I know this is the case for me, and I'm curious as to whether or not you feel the same, but I feel like once you've gotten used to working for yourself, like once you get to a certain point as an entrepreneur, it's difficult, if not impossible, to go back. Like once you kind of get used to working for yourself and not having to answer to someone else, like the idea of having to go back to working for someone else, for me, it just makes me cringe. And it's not that like I had terrible bosses or anything like that. It's just that I love the autonomy that, being my own boss provides.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I help out with actually this music festival every year in Winston-Salem. And essentially what I do is I'm the runner for it. So that means I'm the person that kind of makes sure the band gets picked up from the airport, has kind of things they need. Do some odd jobs too, help with some like equipment and everything. But I guess the person I answer to is a guy I've known for years and I like him personally. But I remember a couple years ago working with him, just getting irrationally angry because he was just staying on top of me about things that needed to be done. And like, I just remember like, I got so furious. And then I remember thinking like, wait a minute, why am I mad over that? This is just, so to your point. Yeah. I mean, it is tough to have other people managing your time once you've kind of achieved that autonomy.
Yeah, no doubt it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like, like you have clients, I have clients. So,
Mm-hmm.
in a way you're beholden to your clients, but you made the point earlier, you're saying, now you get to choose who you work with,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you get the impression that, a particular client's just going to, really be a pain to work with, you don't have to work with them, right? You're in that position. You don't have to work with them unless you feel like it's going to be a good collaboration and something that, obviously you'll make good money from, but also that, it's opportunity cost, right? You could always say, look, I think my time could be better
Mm-hmm.
spent instead of working with this client that's going to have unreasonable expectations or just be a thorn in your side. And that's
not always been the case. I mean, that there's early on, and I would say we'll probably talk more about, how you get into freelancing, but early on when you first start freelancing, you're almost better off just saying yes to a lot of things.
Yeah.
Just because you need the experience and you need the money. But I'm at the point now where I can turn people away if I want to. I won't revisit exactly what happened, but I had a call with a potential client a few months ago and probably decided within 20 or 30 seconds of talking to this person that it wasn't going to work out. And it again, we don't have to necessarily touch on exactly what happened, but I heard him out. I talked to him. I was nice to him and just kind of followed up with an email and basically said, hey, I'm not going to be able to really put a lot of time into this, but it does feel good to say, what, that would have just been a headache. I wouldn't have been able to do a good job for him, and it would have been a bad experience for everybody. So
yeah,
a lot of times, you're also helping sometimes you're helping other people by not helping them just because you're not the right fit for that project.
Yeah, sure. And you're right. I think, for most people, whether they're freelancing or whatever their business is, it's, that's not necessarily where you start, right? You might have to
Hmm.
take every gig you can get or anyone that's willing to work with you and pay you. But over time, if you're doing well, you will get to the point where you've got the luxury of kind of being able to pick and choose. In my consulting business, that's something that, I'm getting better at, right? Is I've got to recognize who's going to be worth me spending my time with, and who's not. Because if I'm not careful, I can invest a lot of time with someone and it never ends up putting any money in my pocket. And I'm fine doing that as long as the person I'm working with is taking the process seriously and is genuinely interested in my help. And I've worked with some people that wasn't the case. I mean, just last week I essentially fired a guy that I was working with because he wasn't being straight with me. And I just told him, I said, look, it's impossible for me to actually help you and add any value if you're not being transparent with me with what's going on. And I basically told him, I don't think that it's a good use of either of our time to continue, working together. And, it sucks that it played out that way, but at the same time, I'd rather have the flexibility to be able to
Hmm.
make that call than be kind of forced into continuing to spin my wheels with this person.
I'm curious what sort of Machiavellian mindset would go into working with a consultant such as yourself for something as complicated and niche as franchising, to not be honest and transparent with them. That's it's strange to me that someone would seek you out and then be that way. That's
Yeah, and
bizarre.
this is someone that was referred to me by someone I know pretty well. That's actually
Mhm.
a franchisee in the same business that Kelly and I are franchisees in, and so yeah, I mean, he kind of came to me for my expertise, and yeah, I don't know, it blows my mind, but it happens probably more often than you would think. The same way it blows my mind that someone will actually invest in a franchise business, right? Which a big part of what you're investing in is the business model, right? That the
Mhm.
franchisor has, the proven system, the processes. I mean, you basically get a playbook as to how to start this business. And a lot of what you're getting when you buy a franchise is you benefit from getting to avoid the mistakes that have already been made in that
Mhm.
business, right? It's all documented. You know exactly what to do and what not to do. And people buy franchises and then they throw the playbook to the wind day one, thinking that they know better. And it's like, look, if that's your mindset, just go start something from scratch. Why even spend the money to get into a franchise if you're not going to take advantage of everything that's there, the framework that you're kind of buying into. So that one's always been a head scratcher for
Yeah,
me too. But
pride's a weird thing, I guess.
yeah, it's ego. It's ego,
Mhm.
man. The ego can really get in the way of things. But so, let's talk a little bit more about freelancing.
Mhm.
What advice would you have to someone that's considering, getting into freelancing, regardless of whatever their service is, right? I mean, these days, especially, there's so many different ways that someone could, offer various freelance services. But, what are some of the things that you've learned over the years that might be helpful to someone that's, kind of at the point where they're just now really thinking about getting into it?
This is going to sound a little bit narrow because I'm going to speak to people providing something artistic just because that's what my experience is. So whether that's visual or in my case like voice or voiceovers or podcasting,
Yeah.
if you don't have a lot of experience, just find the way to do the work. So if you do like graphic design, maybe like if do something for a friend, don't charge them anything, or just make up a company and do a little logo
Yeah.
for them. In my case, it was doing voiceovers, and actually the first podcast I ever had was just me and my college friends just kind of goofing off, and I mean essentially it was a portfolio piece for me because
Yep.
I had decided I really wanted to try to help other people make podcasts, but I needed evidence that I could do one. So find a way to just do the work. And typically I don't advocate working for free because I don't think that's how art or business should work. But at least when you're starting out, find a way just to create yourself a portfolio. Think of it as an investment in your time,
Yeah.
or investing your time, because sometimes, you invest money to get a return on something. Well, be willing to put a couple hours a week into into working on your craft and fine tuning your skills, because it will pay off eventually.
No doubt. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, where you worked for the radio station for free
Hmm.
in exchange to use their equipment. Yeah, if you're
Yeah.
going to freelance, regardless of what it is, you've got to have some sort of a portfolio to showcase your work. So yeah, do it for free at first. You can't, and I think that's probably a pretty common pitfall for a lot of people trying to get into freelancing is
Hmm.
they never really make a move because they're waiting on that first paying client. And it's kind
Yeah.
of one of those, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Because most people are not going to pay good money to a freelancer if they don't have any proof of what they can do. And so instead of sitting around waiting for it to fall into your lap, go out there and put in some time and start building a portfolio and showcase what you can actually do. And then chances are you find it much easier to actually bring in paying clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'll just caution to make sure you set limitations and boundaries with that. One thing, if you ever do anything for someone for free, make sure you have that conversation. Listen, like,
True.
don't, the fact that I did it for free is confidential. You don't
Mm,
want it getting out there that you do work for free. So it's kind of tricky. It's good advice, and I stand by that. But have some limitations, because I know within, like, the freelance artist community or world, or whatever you want to call it, it's kind of a controversial thing. This idea of expecting people to do things for you for free. A lot
right.
of people take issue with that, and I understand that. I mean, I think they mean well when they say, always pay someone, and I think you should. But that said, if you're on the other side of that and you're just trying to create a portfolio, carve a little time out for yourself. Just do something on your own time. Consider it, invest in your time, and instead of going out to the bar with your friends one night, maybe spend that time just working and really creating your craft. Also, the way I look at it is, if you aren't willing to do that and take that little bit of extra time and invest some energy and creative thought into fine tuning your craft, is it something you would really want to do in the long run anyway?
No
If
doubt.
the answer is no, then don't, maybe, take a different, go a different direction. There's no shame, or there's nothing wrong with that.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because if whatever it is, if you don't enjoy it enough to spend, at least a handful of hours, as you said, fine tuning your craft and kind of, building that portfolio, if you don't enjoy it enough to do that, like you're probably going to be miserable even when you do get to the point of having paying clients. So,
Exactly.
that's one thing I always, when I'm working with someone about getting into a business, a big part of what we focus on is, what do you enjoy doing? What do you not enjoy doing? And then let's try to find a business that's going to not only cater to your skill set, but also involve more of what you enjoy doing. It's not to
Hmm.
say that you're not going to have to do things that you don't enjoy doing. Most businesses are going to require some of that, but let's find a business that's not like super heavy on things that you just hate doing. Because to me, if you're going to go to the links of getting into business for yourself, might as well find something that majority of the time you're enjoying, versus just spending all your time on something that makes you miserable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's a really good point.
Any other advice for the aspiring freelancer?
Yeah, make sure you really do your research and make sure you get on to some sort of freelancing platform. Don't
Hmm.
just try to go out there and wing it. I'll recommend Upwork. I know
Hmm.
you've had some success finding people on Fiverr. I think
I've used
moonlighting.
both.
Yeah,
Upwork's great too, in my experience.
yeah. So since a lot of your listeners are probably business owners and have probably done some kind of sales before, think of it as the difference between cold calling and having some, like, really hot leads.
Yeah.
When I first started out, I probably wasted a lot of time doing Google searches for, you know, like production companies kind of near me. Which, again, why would I, for something that you can do remotely? Why would it have the geography shouldn't have mattered?
Yeah.
But that was my approach, and so I'm sending out all these emails with, like, attaching my demo reels, and best case scenario, someone would respond and say, "Hey, thanks for this. If we need you, we'll hire you."
Right.
Versus when I got involved with it was called Elancing at the time, or Elancer, I believe. Then you're responding directly to people who need your services. So
Hmm.
definitely do that, and take the time to set yourself up a profile and build a website if you need to. All those things that seem like, your time traps early on. And even if you have to invest a little bit of money into it, which can be hard to do if you don't have much, but to the extent that you can and what you can invest, do it, because it pays off eventually. Sometimes after 1 or 2 gigs.
Yeah, no doubt. But yeah, I think what you were doing initially, I would classify that as more of a sniper approach, whereas, creating a good profile on some of the different freelancing platforms, that's much more of a shotgun approach. And it's a little more proactive, right? I mean, you're putting yourself out there, showcasing what you do uh, for people that are specifically looking for those services
Mhm.
versus just kind of randomly reaching out to a bunch of people hoping that maybe they have a need. Um,
Yeah. And those freelancing platforms, I mean, they have a lot of tools built to help you succeed, because essentially that's how they make their money, is they get a
sure.
commission off of what you make. So it's in their best interest that you do well. So they have a lot of things like, they have different algorithms that help if you're doing well, that put your profile at the top. There's referral systems, so people can essentially see how well you've done in the past.
Yep.
Works a little bit like Uber, where you rate the client and they rate you.
Yeah, you
There's
can get reviews.
Yeah, your payments are protected, so someone can't, like, ghost you or not pay you or anything like that. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of advantages to it. A lot of people don't like having to pay a commission, but a lot of times it's 80% of what you could make on a platform like that is a lot more than 100% of what you can make on your own.
Well said. And so I actually haven't thought about it this way. It's very similar to franchising in a lot of ways, right? Once you're a franchisee, the franchisor gets a percentage of your revenue, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of people I talk to, they're like, well, why would I want to get into a business where I'm going to just right off the top have to give a percentage of my revenue back to the franchisor? And the way to look at it is, and I would say it's the same with what you're talking about with the freelance platforms, is okay, but what do I get in exchange for that? Right. So
Hmm.
whatever the percentage is, right? If it's 7%, 10%, 15%, whatever the number is, it becomes a simple math equation, right? What does it cost me? And then what do I get in exchange for it? And what you get in exchange should outweigh the cost. And then it's a no brainer. The other thing that these freelancing platforms do is they have all the traffic, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that's where people are going, especially now when you were first getting into this, sites like Upwork and Fiverr were not as prominent as they are now, but that's where all the traffic is, right? So now
Hmm.
you have your own website, and it's a great website, and it showcases your services just like your profile on these platforms do, but you'd have to spend a god awful amount of money to drive traffic to your own website the way Upwork and Fiverr gets traffic to their websites.
Yeah,
Um,
I spend no time trying to drive traffic to my website, other than occasionally sending out links to prospective clients. I don't worry about any sort of SEO or
right.
Google traffic or anything like that. My website's literally a portfolio. I don't care if I'd rather one right person see it, one client, than drive 20,000 people who don't have any real interest in hiring me. So it kind of, like you said, it handles the web traffic thing for you. And
Yeah.
right now it seems like there's a lot of hand wringing and people racking their brains to try to figure out all this SEO stuff, and how do you break through. And so yeah, being a part of a platform like that, and especially once you've had some success on it, it does the hard work for you. My assumption is Upwork they've figured that part out. And
Well, they have teams of people doing it because
oh
the
yeah,
SEO and stuff. It's an ever changing game, right? I mean, the
yeah.
algorithms change all the time. So I mean, to try to stay on top of what you need to do to make a website relevant from a search engine optimization standpoint, that's a full time job for a whole team of people. And my guess is if you were to look at total revenue that your business brought in through, say, Upwork over the course of a year, and the percentage of that you've paid back to Upwork, if you were to compare that number to, what you would have to spend on your own to drive traffic to your own website, it'd be significantly more,
Oh yeah.
substantially more.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's the way to look at it, right? And that's, to me, like, I think right now there's never been a better time for someone to get into business for themselves that really wants to, I mean, there's almost no reason not to. There's almost no excuses anymore. I mean, because you can start doing something like freelancing, and you don't even have to quit your job, right? I mean, everyone needs to have
Mhm.
income in order to live, right? And some people may have more money saved up than others, so they give themselves a little bit of a runway where they could leave their job, start a business, and get that business ramped up to the point where it's starting to generate an income for them. There's a lot of people out there that are not in that position, right? So
Yeah.
freelancing could be a great way, to kind of take that first step into business ownership. And there's almost no excuse not to do it if it's something that you're really driven to do, because there's so many tools out there, and freelancing is just becoming more popular. Or I guess I should
Mhm.
say outsourcing is becoming more popular,
Yeah.
right?
Depending
I
on how
mean,
you look at it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, outsourcing, I mean, companies more so than ever would rather, bring in someone to handle a project for them on an as needed basis versus having someone in house on payroll to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about, you don't need to quit your job or anything. That's kind of the cool thing about freelancing is you can kind of scale it to your lifestyle and your needs at the time. I know a lot of people actually who do work their full-time jobs that they
Hmm.
that they like for the most part.
Yeah,
And they do a little bit of freelancing on the side. And for some ways it's almost actually better for them because they have that income and they've got that stability. They only focus on projects that they just 100% like, and the money is just an added perk. I know a woman who she works here in Greensboro, and she only does stuff for local businesses that she really likes and knows the people. She doesn't really. She's done some work for me before too, uh, and she doesn't really mess necessarily with reaching out to clients or anything like that. People go to her, and she's got her full time job that she likes with all her health benefits and everything like that.
sure.
And you also mentioned a good point too, is about how you don't have to quit your job, and it's also a good way for people who might be interested in owning a business or working for themselves to kind of test the waters, because the overhead's relatively low compared to even what you do, where I imagine you have some inventory. I know you don't have a brick and mortar store, but you've got some inventory
Hmm.
that you're responsible for, and that I imagine has some cost, and you've got some people working for you that you have to pay. Well, if you're freelancing, your overhead is so incredibly low. The risk is pretty low. I mean,
Yeah.
worst thing that happens is people say no to your proposal, or I don't know, might be a little bit worse if you do some work and they don't like it. But for the most part, the financial risk is pretty low, and they always say you're at the best time to find a job is while you have one. So
For
the
sure.
other the other advice is, if you are interested in getting into freelancing full time, don't quit your job if you have one. I mean, that's just because you'll be in a better position to kind of find your niche if you're not financially desperate.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've seen too many new business owners make really poor business decisions because they're worried about paying their own bills. And so
Hmm.
they start trying to pay themselves from a business that's not ready to start paying them yet. So the longer you can go, I don't care what the business is, the longer you can go without pulling money out of the business to pay yourself, the better of a position you're going to be in. If you can reinvest any profits that you are making into the business, that's going to set you up for success much more. And I've seen it too many times where people they just made really bad business decisions out of desperation, basically.
Hmm.
So I think that's a good point. And the nice thing with freelancing is you can use it as a way to test the waters. And as you get a better feel for it, as you build more confidence, as you get a portfolio of work out there, it's the type of thing that you can grow it and get it to the point where, if that's your goal, you can leave your job and do it full time, but you're not going kind of cold turkey, I guess to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Awesome, man. Good stuff. Any final words for the aspiring freelancer out there?
Yeah, I guess more generic advice for anyone doing freelancing, not just someone who is doing stuff like more artistic, is just one, understand from an economic standpoint that you do have value, and that, and I don't mean that as like a pep talk. I just mean that in very practical terms. Like, people need your services.
Yeah.
And you should, so it's kind of, I don't mean it to sound too contradictory from what I said earlier, to where, you should do things for free starting out, but eventually get to the point where it's like, don't let people who are cynical tell you that, there's not space for you in the workforce. I have a client who has a saying that he likes to say a lot. He says, art for the sake of commerce, meaning he thinks art projects are great if it leads to making a lot of money, which if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, I would have said the exact opposite. I'd have said commerce for the sake of art, make whatever money you can so you can pursue your artistic passions. The reality is that thought process is probably a spectrum, and the balance is probably somewhere in between. But wherever you fall on that spectrum, understand that commerce and art need one another.
Yep.
If someone's out there trying to sell things, they probably need your artistic ability to help them do that. I love the story of Steve Jobs, who, when he was at Apple and initially had all that success, and then they rolled out the first MacBook. And what he did was he goes into like the New York Times and takes out this like 3-page ad and writes this really long explanation about why it's so great. And probably, I'm sure everything he wrote in there was 100% true, but the general public didn't really care. And
or even understand it.
Or even understand what he was talking about. Eventually, the MacBook was a failure at first, and he ended up getting pushed out of Apple. And it wasn't until he went to Pixar and Disney that he understood the power of art and crafted a narrative. Then he comes back to Apple and helps, oversee one of the greatest, most successful ad campaigns of all time. So I say all that to say is if you've got, if you've gone to art school, don't let people tell you that there's no economic value in that, because I think there actually can be. I'm not saying you have to go work for Apple, but I'm saying, there's people out there who need your services. And if you know where to look, you can make a living for yourself doing the kinds of things you like to do.
Yeah. And don't undervalue your time either. Especially once you've gotten started and you have some credibility, don't sell yourself short, on what you're charging. But I like the example of Steve Jobs, and I've heard, a lot of stories around, how much time and money, he invested at Apple on just designing, like the box that the iPhone comes in, and the box that the computers come in. I mean, he really did learn that, art helps sell, in his case, technology. And he put a ton of thought into all of it, even the inside components of all of the different technology that Apple sells. He was very, very passionate about making sure that it was aesthetically pleasing, even though majority of consumers never see the inside of their iPhone or their MacBook.
And admit it, everyone's held on to that box from their iPhone or their MacBook way longer than they needed to. You always tell yourself, well, just in case I need to.
Just in case.
Really, it looks cool. And you hope if someone like opens your closet door, they'll see it one day. I mean, that's
it's true. I got 2 MacBook boxes and probably at least 2 iPhone boxes in my cabinet right down here. It's so true. That's funny. All right. Well, so one other question, and then we'll jump into our lightning round.
Sure.
I asked you earlier about, if what is now Small League Productions started with a vision, and you said, no, not necessarily. What's your vision today for, where you take Small League Productions going forward, or anything beyond Small League Productions?
Yeah. So I think broadly speaking, I like what I'm doing, where I'm helping a lot of these small businesses and startups and B2B type stuff. And I want to keep doing that, but also want to branch out a little bit. I want to help different types of storytellers from all kinds of different backgrounds, people who maybe ordinarily wouldn't have been able to break through all the noise that you have currently. And without sounding like too vague or abstract, just create programming that's like thoughtful, I guess. One thing that's like stuck out to me with all this stuff with like coronavirus and everything is there's just a lot of bad information out there.
Tell me about it.
It can come from, not just from mainstream media. I mean, there is that, but there's also just, now people can, someone can film a YouTube video in their car and can say they've got the answer to curing COVID, and it'll get 10 million views and likes. And
it's clickbait.
That could, and it's not from like a standpoint of like, that guy's got a bad opinion. It's like, no, there could be some real consequences to that. So I guess that's a roundabout way of saying, like, I just really want to help, like good, thoughtful people tell stories and get information out there that's good and meaningful to other people. So, yeah, just kind of broadly speaking, just helping all kinds of different creators and brands and business owners, whoever, really, just kind of break through the noise a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it's
Mhm.
something that's very much needed. And I think, how information is spread and consumed, obviously it's changed drastically over the last, 10 years, but it just seems to be changing very, very rapidly. So I would say it's a good space to be playing in. So how do you,
Mhm.
at this point, how do you see that kind of coming to fruition? Is it through, doing more of the podcast work that you're doing? Is it the voiceover work, a combination of that? Is there anything that you're not currently offering as a service from your company that you could see yourself wanting to get more involved in to help you kind of, make this vision become a reality?
In the short term, I think it's going to be podcasting and voice work.
Yeah.
I like to keep an open mind because I've been doing this kind of work since I was 18 years old. So in that 12 years, there's been a lot of changes. But what I'll say to maybe comfort people who don't like rapid change and don't know what the future holds, what I do from a technical standpoint or from a creative standpoint actually hasn't changed. It's
Yeah.
just the platforms for it
Yeah.
have changed. And a good example of that is the fact that audio dramas have made such a rapid comeback. I know that there's so many different types of podcasts out there, but there's this whole fictional stuff like Welcome to Nightville
Hmm.
and stuff like or Night Vale. These stuff that radio dramas basically ceased to exist after like probably like the 50s or 60s. So
After TVs became more popular, the radio
mhm.
dramas kind of went away.
And they've come back. And I've
Yeah.
heard musicians say the same thing when people ask them, well, what do they think about all these streaming platforms and all that? And what they've all said is that, at its core, the music industry hasn't, or maybe the industry's changed, but music hasn't really changed. It's always been, someone with an idea and a little bit of creativity sitting down and writing a song. So I say all that to say is I'll probably try to be as flexible as I can be. If there's ever another platform that helps storytellers and creators and brands and business owners get their ideas out there, then I'll be open to helping them out that way. But for now, it's podcasting, and it might be for a while. Who knows?
Yeah. So for the immediate future, you
Mhm.
see podcasting kind of being the predominant platform where you can help people accomplish what you'd like to. So you're
Mhm.
not killing the podcast side of your business and going all in on TikTok then.
Absolutely not.
All right. Fair enough. Um, well, cool, man. This has been interesting. I know for everyone listening in, and again, I just love the fact that I'm super proud of you for what you've done. Really kind of taking things that you've just always been interested and passionate about, and turning it into a business and creating a livelihood for yourself instead of ever having to rely on someone else. I think it's something that most people would like the idea of being able to do. Very few people have the guts to actually try it and make it happen.
Oh, well, thanks, man. Yeah, all I'd say to anyone who feels that way is just stick with it. I know that's kind of broad advice, but I mean, I definitely had to work some tough odd jobs here and there. We don't have to revisit all that, but it's all worth it. Once you get to a point where you are working for yourself and doing
No
the
doubt.
things you like it. Yeah.
No doubt. You got to keep the bigger picture in mind
Mhm.
because it doesn't matter what you're doing. There's going to be tough days, and so those are the days, especially where you got to keep the bigger picture in mind that you're working towards. Well, something I know you're very familiar with since you do edit all of these podcasts. Let's hit the lightning round here real quick.
Let's do
You
it.
probably have the questions memorized, but for the sake of the audience, I'll run through them real quick. So the first question, as you know, is what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? And that could be business advice or just general life advice.
It came from a weird source, but you're going to know who it is. Our dentist growing up.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Jeff Johnson.
Okay.
Right about the time I was graduating college, I went for a dentist checkup, and it was right before he retired. And he asked me what I was planning to do after graduation, and I told him I don't know, I guess get a job. And he just kind of casually said, "Well, that's cool, but make sure you give yourself some time to teeter around a bit."
Hmm.
I'm really glad he told me that. And I'm really glad someone that respected and that, kind of someone that I trusted told me that, because kind of in a sense he was saying, don't, grow up too quickly, try different things. And I've tried a lot of different things, and that was some of the best advice I've ever been given.
Yeah.
Largely because, one of the ways, if you work in a type of field that requires you to be creative, and almost every type of job requires it in some form or another.
No
One of
doubt.
the best, yeah, one of the best, I think, one of the best sources of creativity is just getting out of your comfort zone a little bit.
100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Your dentist gave you the best piece of advice you've ever received. Just goes to show you always got to be on the lookout for, a golden nugget to drop in your lap. But it's good advice. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Especially at that point where you were in your life. Yeah, I think most people in that position are probably putting undue pressure on themselves to hurry up and find a job or take the first job that comes along. And so credit to you for actually taking that advice. Next question. Do you have a morning routine?
Yeah, to some extent I do, especially pre-pandemic. I'd get up early in the morning with my wife, and usually while she's getting ready for work, make breakfast, make lunch for her. And that's usually our time that we hang out, because, again, pre-pandemic, when I had sporting events and stuff to work a lot of the evenings, sometimes that, hour and a half in the morning was all the time we had during the day, except for, right before bed. So, but even still, even with being in the pandemic, and now that she's going back to work, still waking up, making breakfast for us, and just kind of hanging out. After that, usually read a little bit or do some exercise, just completely disconnect from anything work related. Just have some time to myself.
Well, I know I think at least part of your morning routine is you've got a pretty nice record collection, and
Oh, yeah.
you'll put a different, because I see on Instagram you post your morning tunes, whatever you're listening to that morning.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's a lot of fun to do too. Just even if it's just background noise while I'm cooking and cleaning, or while I'm reading, and it's rare that I just sit and listen to it, but it's always great to have on the background. And yeah, it just kind of gets my brain in a pretty good space.
Yeah, no doubt. I've really learned that, you can use music to kind of intentionally set the tone for, whatever you're doing at any given point in time, or to change your mindset. So that's cool. What book are you reading right now?
It's not related to business at all, but I'm reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's a pretty comprehensive history of Nazi Germany. And just for the record, I'm very much against what the Nazis did.
Sure.
I'm not reading it.
I can vouch for that.
I'm not reading it to draw any kind of inspiration. I've always found history kind of interesting. Our mom's a history teacher. I don't think we've ever talked about that on the podcast, but so
yeah,
I've always found history to be pretty interesting, particularly 20th century European history. So it doesn't really do anything for me on a professional level, but it's fun to learn. And just kind of have that space in the morning where I'm just doing something I like.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think our mom did a good job of kind of instilling a love and appreciation for history in us. I always have a book, like a physical book that I'm reading, and then something I'm listening to on Audible. So right now I've got it's a biography of Benjamin Franklin. It's called Benjamin Franklin, An American Life. And Kelly thinks I'm such a nerd. But to me, it's interesting. And I'd kind of made a goal this year to read or listen to more biographies or autobiographies, because I think you can, learn a lot from how other successful people handled their lives. And it's interesting. He's an interesting character for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So cool. So final question. And, I think we've gotten into a little bit of this today, but very curious to kind of hear your answer. What is your definition of freedom, and are you living it?
My definition of freedom is being able to say no to things you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, I am. I'm certainly I'm not wealthy necessarily in the sense that I have a lot of money, but I do have material security and comfort. My wife's got a job. I make a living doing what I do, so I'm not in desperate need of money. and I can say no to things I don't want to do. And I do feel like I kind of own my own time. Again, going back pre-pandemic days, it was really cool to be able to take an hour and a half, 2 hour lunch break, go hang out with, with a friend during the day or whatever. So yeah, that would largely be my definition. And I would say for the most part, I am. It's an evolution. It's like everything. There's no finish line you just cross one day, but
no, there's not. It's something that you're always working. But I love that definition, right? Being able to say no to things that you don't want to do. And, if that's your definition of freedom, you'll never be entirely free, right? I mean, life is partially doing things that you don't want to do, right?
Sure.
Plus you're married. So you're always going to have some things that you've got to do that you don't necessarily want to do. Oh, and on that note, so Stuart and his lovely wife, Rebecca, are celebrating their 1-year wedding anniversary tomorrow as of the recording of this. So
yeah, we'll be a couple days past it when it goes out, but yeah.
True. Yeah, true. But happy anniversary to you guys. Very thanks, happy man. For you. Can't believe it's been a year already since we celebrated the wedding. And
well, you were the best man, and your adorable daughter Mackenzie was the flower girl. She killed it.
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Well, very cool. So where can people check out some of your work? Where can they learn more about your services? I also wanted to mention, in case you don't mention it, you have a podcast yourself. It's called the ObscureBall podcast. Something that you do just, again, to kind of showcase, what you're able to do for other podcasters, but it's a fascinating podcast. Tell us a little bit about what the ObscureBall podcast is all about.
Yeah. ObscureBall is a narrative style sports podcast where we do a semi deep dive into really interesting episodes in sports history. So as an example, when Doc Ellis, we just had the 50-year anniversary of him throwing a no-hitter on LSD.
That was one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah. If you don't know the story, I mean,
don't tell the story, make them check out the podcast.
By all means, please listen to my podcast. And then after you do that, go over to YouTube and look up, I can't remember what the name of it is, but there's an animated documentary that he narrated about that. That was kind of the inspiration for that. So yeah, so in a nutshell, it's usually about a 20-minute, 25-minute narrative style podcast. And I bring on different types of guests on there. I've had Dan Epstein, who's he's a freelance writer, but his work has been in the Rolling Stone. He helped me do an episode about a riot after a Washington Senators game, or during it rather. So yeah, that's kind of what it is. It's usually pretty quirky stories that, you might not see on the headlines all the time.
Yeah. It's to me, like, I think just about every episode are things that I wasn't really aware of. So not necessarily the major headlines, but interesting stuff. So you got an ObscureBall podcast. We'll post that in the show notes.
Awesome.
And then website.
So it's smallleaguestew.com, or you can just Google Small League Productions. And yeah, go on there. You can, if you need to get in touch with me for whatever reason, you can just go to the contact page and drop me a message. And on social media, you can find me at Small League Stew, also on Twitter and Instagram. I don't really put anything real interesting out there necessarily. It's just more my day-to-day stuff, whatever music I'm listening to, or whatever random thoughts I have about things. But
well, this is one of the benefits of you editing my podcast, is you can drop whatever of your information you want people to see in the show notes before this publishes. So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll make sure to link all that up so you guys can check out the ObscureBall podcast and Stuart's website. But hey, man, I appreciate everything. Thank you for helping make this podcast become a reality, and thanks for joining me as a guest.
Hey, this was fun. Thanks for including me.
All right, go drop in, everyone. Thanks.